Who is one stranger you remember to this day? Please consider subscribing if you enjoy the video. Overweight guy was ordering in front of me at Subways. Literally mid-sentence he stops, mutters to himself, "What am I doing?" and walks out. When I was a kid there was a man who would hang out at the side of the playground. Not because he was being a creep but because he was really far into special needs and he had a mind of a child. He would stand there as the kids went running by and blurt out, "Hi, I am Larry." He did this for all 5 years of grade school. I think about him often, to be honest. He was so happy, yet all he wanted to was play with us when we would play kickball or whatever, but wasn't allowed to step onto the playground. One time, I went to the gum wall in Seattle. My friend put his chewed gum on the wall and this guy came up behind him, plucked it off the wall and started chewing it. He told my friend, "Any gum you put on the wall is mine." He didn't even look like a crazy homeless guy. He was well groomed and wearing a suit. Never been more unnerved in my life. And I was just an onlooker. My sophomore year in college I would always see this older man on my walk to my math class. He always went out of his way to say good morning and ask how I was doing that day. We never exchanged names, just two people checking in on each other. I am Canadian. When I was 17, more than half my life ago now, I got a 6-month working holiday maker's visa and moved to the Forest of Dean on the Welsh border, halfway between Cardiff and Gloucester. My mother had a childhood friend who lived there, and she said she could get me a job as a shepherd for the summer, but that fell through. I ended up working as a laborer in a factory that crushed rock into powder for obscure and exotic purposes in an industrial park outside Cardiff. I will never forget the rural bus driver who picked me up and dropped me off going to and from work. Even though I've long since forgotten his name, it was the same bloke both ways, which means he must have been working a 12-hour day, although I imagine maybe he got a few hours off in the middle of his shift when everyone who had to get to work was there, and no one was heading home yet. This was not a bus for tourists. It hit all the small towns once in the morning and once again at night to shuttle people to mines and factories and mills. When you got a job, you called the bus company to let them know you needed a ride. He freely admitted he knew everyone on his route well enough to know when he could pull over and take a cat nap. He made models out of matchsticks. He was always rubbing down matchsticks with sandpaper to make little bits and pieces for ships or trains or bridges or houses or furniture. He showed me pictures of his finished work. It was quite impressive. Some of it he sold, and some of it he donated to museums. My work was dirty. When your end product is dust, you end up black like a coal miner. This guy found an army surplus greatcoat somewhere, and he used to wrap me in it when I boarded the bus at the end of my shift so I wouldn't mess up his upholstery. Sometimes I fell asleep against the window and smudged the glass with the dust in my hair. He started keeping a bottle of Windex under his seat just to clean up after me. My favorite memory of him was of him yelling at the sheep that would stand in the middle of the country roads. He'd start by honking, then yelling, then revving the engine, then finally he'd get out of the bus and ask the sheep very nicely to move. If they still wouldn't, he'd come back on the bus and say, "Right lads, we're here for a bit. Take a nap if you like. I'm going to fiddle with my matchsticks." I have a picture of him somewhere. White collared short sleeve shirt with a dark tie. He was middle-aged, round without being fat, bald without it being his defining feature. Those were his bold dark eyebrows, and he had a smile that told the world he'd figured it all out. Found his comfortable niche, and wanted no more from life. He had no strife or troubles. He just took people to work, took them home again, and in between he napped, did a bit of model making with matchsticks, and yelled at the sheep to me. He was the very soul of rural England, but as there's a 50/50 shot he was Welsh. I don't know if he'd like me saying so. A few years ago, I was waiting to buy a drink at a concert, and this Russian guy next to me said something to me. I responded. He instantly realized that I was American, and suddenly starts yelling, "You're American. You're going to frick my daughter." I calmly reassured him that I was not, in fact, trying to frick his daughter. He seemed satisfied with that, then handed me a shot of really bad vodka and disappeared. I think about that guy a lot. I also feel bad for whoever eventually fricks his daughter. Great question, and it triggered a memory I haven't thought of in years. When I was a teen I moved to London, didn't know anyone and used to spend my free time wandering around the city. One night I was probably out too late and in the wrong part of town. Got beaten up pretty bad and ended up in hospital. The next day a man arrived with my wallet that was taken during the beating. He must have stayed talking to me for 2 hours. Just general chat and asking me how I ended up like this, about my family, home place, etc. It was the most company I had had since I moved there, and it was at a time I really needed some human contact, and I think he knew that. I did thank him, but he probably didn't realize just how much I needed him there that day. My credit card got declined at Subway and the lady behind me paid for my sandwich. I thanked her profusely, and then sat down and almost cried. This was months and months ago, but I'll always be grateful for her kindness. I was really drunk trying to find my way back to a friend's new house after we got separated. Walking back from the bar, I was in a dress and heels with no coat in the middle of a Canadian winter. A guy was randomly walking and noticed how drunk I was and offered to help me find my friends. He stayed with me all night, walking at first and then driving in his car until I sobered up, trying to find my friend's house. I didn't have my cell phone on me and no money. It could have turned out a lot worse. He gave me a pair of pants and a jacket, and when I finally sobered up around 8 AM I realized that my friend's house was on the street behind his house. Thank you, kind stranger, for staying with me and making sure nothing happened to me. Neighbor from the corner in my old neighborhood. My brother and I were playing catch outside with our football while he was sitting in his garage. He saw I couldn't throw well and came over to us. He showed me how to throw the ball. Thanks to him I became better at throwing and went on to play for the school as QB. When I got my driver's license I drove to one of my old friends to meet up with others' friends and catch up. But when I arrived I realized he lived on the street of my childhood. After some time we went outside to play some football and saw my old neighbor Adrian. I called a timeout and walked up to him to thank him since I would have never gone to go play football if it wasn't for him. The girl on my running route who asked if she could run with me sometime and I said sure and didn't give her my number or get hers. This Indian dude who worked in a convenience store just down the road from where I live. I went there with my cousin one time just to pick up some snacks and alcohol. We ask him what we should buy. He picks up this bottle of super strong stuff. My cousin says, "Oh my god, I'm not trying to die." He responds with, "It's good when you die, you know?" His Indian accent made it sound pretty funny. I was low-key creeped out at first, until he started talking about how he had a near-death experience on LSD, and how he takes all kinds of psychedelics, sometimes even when he's on shift. For some reason I felt really sad for him. Even though he seemed like a super happy guy, I sometimes wonder where he is now and how he's doing. A girl named Rose. She was a super shy 7-year-old girl with cancer. I got to hang out with her at an outdoor camp for one of the days we were both there. After a couple of hours, she began to open up. She never let loose like a child would, but stayed very reserved and told me about the things she could still enjoy doing. At 7 years old, she had read every Harry Potter book for the rest of the day. I listened to her talk about nothing but Harry Potter. I'm not big on Harry Potter, but it was one of the best days of my life. The one 6th grader when I was in 8th, he asked me if I was his dad. I'm female. I said yes, and the kids with him started cheering. This one guy was from Spain and in America for New Year's. He asked me for the Wi-Fi password to the Starbucks so he could call his family. I didn't know it, so I turned on my phone's hotspot and got to hear him speak a language I couldn't understand. He was really appreciative and we got talking about New Year's cultural traditions. I told him it was tradition in America to down a shot for every second of the 10 for the ball drop. To this day I wonder if he ever found out that I lied to him. Gave a Lyft ride to a passenger and drove him deep into the desert, almost exactly between Phoenix and Tucson. He didn't say a single word the whole ride. Asked me to pull over on the highway. Middle of nowhere. Dead of night. Very few cars passing. Grabbed his bags and said, "I think I want to try human flesh today." I 0 to 100. Out of there. I wonder what he did there. Why he wanted off there. There was nothing for miles. So many questions. But he creeped me out so much. 10 years ago, a random guy came up to me in a grocery store and said, "You're the type of girl I date." Then he walked away. That's the last time and first time I was approached like that. I should have said something witty. Then I thought that what he said was a bad thing and that's why he didn't want to stay to chat. We'll never know. I like this question. I was studying abroad in England and near the end of the year, shortly before I was scheduled to return home, I traveled to Ireland with a friend. On the way back, there was a miscommunication and security issue that resulted in me missing my flight, spending the rest of my money to the point of overdrafting on a return flight, waiting 11 hours, and getting back to England around 2 AM, at the Birmingham airport. I realized my cheap phone had died and was basically looking like a lost puppy at the taxi queue. A taxi driver waved me over and asked if I needed a ride. So I explained my situation and he said if I had a contact back at the university who could cover for me. Thankfully my friend I had traveled to Ireland with was waiting and informed of the situation up to the point of my earlier departure. The driver said he'd take care of it and drove me the 45 minutes or so back to the university, stopping for gas. I didn't have to pay for this, as I expected, bought me some snacks. and generally was very wholesome as we talked about our families and our times in England. As he was from Pakistan and was getting used to the country and supporting his family there, we had a great discussion the whole trip, and when we got to the university, he found my waiting friend and said he was only going to charge me 1/4 price, which I gave back to her as soon as I could. Mr. Pakistani taxi driver was one of the friendliest people I met in Europe, and I have no idea what I'd have done if he hadn't waved me over to talk at the airport. Thanks to him, I've been more mindful of strangers' unique circumstances in their daily actions. A girl from 9th grade in 7th period during December who said at 3:05 that my eyes looked nice. I've shared this story before, but people seem to enjoy it, and it's someone I've definitely never forgotten. When I was a kid, we didn't have a lot of money, so we often shopped at thrift stores. What I loved about that was that you could get 10 books for $1, so I would plant myself in front of the book section and make piles of which one I wanted to get, and then decided after I'd gone through them all. One day an older lady saw me sitting with my piles and asked if I liked to read. I told her I did and showed her a few of the books I found that I liked. She smiled and then pulled $1 out of her purse, handed it to me and said, "Promise me that you'll keep reading." I was so happy and immediately stood up and said that I would. She smiled and walked away, and I went back to my piles able to pick out an extra 10 books to take home. It was just a small act of kindness for her, but for me, having a random stranger encourage my love of reading and making me promise to never stop definitely had a lot to do with my continued love of reading, which definitely helped shape who I am today as a writer. This was probably over 20 years, but I still think of her whenever I buy a new book. I was in a hospital, minding my own business, waiting for doctor to see me. At one point the door smashes open, and a person storms out, real angry. A woman, in her 60s, I'm in her way, so she makes a waving motion, like she tries to shove me out of the way, but she doesn't touch me. There is about 4 feet between us. Still, I feel like there was a strong force that pushed me out of her way, and then pressed against the wall, making a way for her. To this day I'm wondering what the frick happened and if she was an airbender. I tried to ask the doctor, and she was all pale and uncomfortable, and asked we do not discuss it. Please subscribe if you like the video. It really helps the channel to grow. Adios.